and we're talking about pay rises in the public sector. Doctors here, through the BMA, calling on the Health Minister, Robin Swan, to give them a pay rise. Doctors and dentists in England, Scotland and Wales just got an uplift in their wages, announced yesterday. Why not here, you may be wondering? And it's all part of a big payout, I suppose, a pay lift in England, Scotland and Wales, announced yesterday. 2.8% increase announced yesterday for doctors. There were teachers included. You've got police and prison officers, National Crime Agency staff in England and Wales given a 2.5 rise. Members of the armed forces, that goes across the whole of the UK, will get 2%. Members of the judiciary, senior civil servants, also getting their pay topped up by 2%. What are your thoughts on this? Can we afford it, given what we're facing with the pandemic and the impending consequences of Brexit and everything else? Can we afford to do this here in Northern Ireland? 03030 80 55 55. Simple question. What do you think the executive should do? And in terms of doctors, what do you think Robin Swan, the Health Minister, should do? Adrian Huston's with us, business leader, Conservative Party member. Patrick Mulholland also here from the union NIPSA. Welcome to both of you. Patrick, take it away, Patrick. Lay your thoughts out for us.
Well, I mean, first of all, William, I suppose we shouldn't be too surprised to see such a miserly rise being put on the table by a Tory government. I mean, we have to remember that the way pay works is you get the bit that makes up inflation, and then the real question is what is on top of that, because that's what a real pay rise is. So we're currently looking at retail price index rate of inflation running between 1.6 and 2.5% this year. So say if it stabilises around 2.5%, which seems likely over the rest of the year, for most of the people identified in this group, this actually means they are either standing still or they are in fact taking a pay cut. So for armed services, for example, 2%. That means they're taking 0.5% of a pay cut. Now, I think at the top end, people might be a bit pleased to see 3.1%. But I suppose this government didn't have much choice in that matter, because they just give themselves a 3.1% increase on the 1st of April, and it come under some political pressure, so they have to provide some political cover for this. On the issue,
well, it was an independent body gave the pay rise, obviously.
Well, obviously it's an independent body that gives that pay rise, William. A very well.
So it's not like the government's giving themselves body. But okay.
No, it's not like they did that at all. Mind you, the independent body gave them 2.75% the year before, and over a 4-year period they give themselves a 20% increase when it wasn't an independent body. But anyway, that aside, we should look at just the most recent history of where we are with pay in Northern Ireland. Civil servants have just got a 2% pay increase after a hard battle for over a year to get to that point. 2% pay increase, frankly, is an insult to civil servants. Think about what these guys have been doing in the fight against COVID. Think about what they do on a day-to-day basis to keep us safe, keep our services in place. And 2% is a real pay decrease for them. Our health service workers in Northern Ireland have just fought a battle on pay as well, a heroic battle, the outcome of which was that the miserly pay award from the Northern Ireland Assembly means that 50% of those people are below inflation. 50% of the health service staff in Northern Ireland in the year 2020 will get a pay increase that is below inflation. Now, I must say, I believe that is a scandal that needs to be rectified. And the other group of public sector workers, what they call the NJC workers, which would be the school staff, council staff, libraries, that great swathe of people, including the housing executive, they're looking at a pay offer at the present time of 2.75%. Now, if you put that in real terms, that's 0.25% of an actual increase when you compare it to RPI. So there's no generosity in this offer. It is, at best, a bit of a headline scam. And it's fairly typical Tory method and approach to pay. What we have to do is move on from this sort of approach, because it's very damaging to the economy in the long run, and it's very damaging.
Let me break in. I was just trying to get your initial thoughts, but if I don't stop you now, Patrick, you're going to finish at 1:30. Adrian Huston's there too. Adrian, I've got to give you a bit of time now. Give us some of your initial thoughts on where we should go with all of this.
Yes, okay, William. Well, my initial thoughts are that, well, first of all, I don't know quite why anyone is entitled to an above-inflation pay rise, because in a business sense, people can only really justifiably look for an above inflation pay rise if they're producing more, being more productive than they were previously. Because otherwise, if the company's products rise in line with inflation, if you were just to take that as an example, then wages can only rise in line with inflation too, because they're part of the cost base. But the thing we have to recognise here is that, well, first of all, I don't accept Patrick's prediction of 2% to or 2.5% inflation coming up. I think that's extremely unlikely in the current circumstances. But even that, setting that aside, we have to recognise that the country is very divided at the moment. And this division will become particularly noticeable as we move into the autumn and the winter. And taxpayer support of all the furloughed employees and taxpayer support by paying civil servants 100% of their pay. The effect of that will come to light because the furloughed employees, currently they're either coming back to work or they're still off, and the public sector support or the taxpayer support of that is going to come to an end in October. And then we're going to see a lot of redundancies. So we're going to have civil servants, public sector, doctors, teachers, everyone who have all maintained 100% of their pay. And then we're going to have all the employees in the private sector, many of whom have seen substantial reductions in their pay through furlough. Some of them, they fell through the gaps in the rules and have had nothing to earn in recent months. And there are going to be businesses closing and thousands upon thousands of jobs lost. So we're going to have these private sector employees and sometimes their bosses as well, and the owners of the businesses, suffering terribly. Meanwhile, everyone in the public sector has the cushion of knowing that their salary is going to be there at the end of the month. And so, unfortunately, the public finances just cannot afford above inflation pay packages, because this whole COVID support system and all the medical expenses going with it is going to be a long time in the country paying for it. And so we have to accept that there's going to be a certain amount of tightening of belts. That's something that in the public sector people often get protected from, but in the private sector you get used to cutting your cloth according to what you have. So there's going to be a big divide between the protected public sector employees and the vulnerable workers and self-employed people in the private sector. And so we don't want to make that worse as we prepare for the financial constraints or additional borrowing that will be necessary to pay for the after effect of the last 6 months.
Well, that's very helpful. We've got Patrick Mulholland and Adrian Huston approaching this completely differently, completely opposed positions, you might say. Where are you on this? 03030 80 55 55. They've laid out some of the arguments for us. Andrea first in Lisburn. Hi, Andrea.
How you doing?
Andrew. Excuse me, Andrew.
What about the care workers? You know, everybody's going on about NHS staff, nurses, doctors, everybody about pay raises. I think the care workers need to get a good pay raise because they've worked through COVID-19 and had to come home to their families. I all know because that's where my wife works at. You know, every day battling with COVID-19, and there's not even a mention of their names. You know, I think it is fair of a pay raise.
Thank you very much.
Maybe a big bonus.
Or a bonus. Boris Johnson did say that those people who work very hard for the public safety to try and save lives during the pandemic would be recognised. I think that was the term he used, wasn't it? Recognised. Big difference between recognition and a pay rise. Of course, there are lots of ways in which you might recognise people. You might applaud them. You might give them a medal. But what about pay rises? Let's go to Fred in Dromore. Hi, Fred.
Hello there. Well, when you think of how MLAs for 3 years didn't do their job and still got paid, and I think a gentleman made those good points there about the public sector can't expect any more money if for where's it going to come from. You often hear now your business editor saying, I remember he said at the time of the recession, which I thought was completely out of character, he said that Northern Ireland, that was the last recession, it was completely out of order. He said that or to my mind it was familiar, where he said that about 60 to 65% of spendable income came from the public sector. But the public sector doesn't make money, it spends money, and it spends the money made by the private sector. So I don't think we can expect the government can't throw money right, left and centre at everything. Some gentleman on Nolan this morning, a pensioner, was complaining about television licence.
I know, yes, he was on our show last week as well. It's a very, very difficult situation.
Went on with this, and then he went on to say that dealing with the government, of course, and then he mentioned he was on 16 tablets a day. But the government paid that as well. Now,
Fred, I've got to get some more callers on, but thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Just breaking away because I want to get Owen from Oma in, give him a bit of time as well. Hi, Owen.
William, good afternoon. How are you?
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Belfast Telegraph had an article last Friday, over £1 million paid in constraint payments to the wind industry for switching off their turbines. Like, while other businesses getting money for closing down, that money is would be better spent in PPE equipment and ventilators, or even paying those that have found sterling work in the health service. I mean, the health and education sectors are being deprived of this money because it's earmarked and rubber stamped for the pay constraint payments and the subsidies to the renewable industry. It's just madness. And like, people's not getting any value for money. There's no cost benefit analysis ever conducted, and throwing money unnecessary.
So your point is that there's money to put around. I'm sure other people take different views on that particular issue. But Owen, I want to stick with this. But thank you very much. I take your point more generally, which is you think there is some money to be used more appropriately in your judgment. I'll come back to Patrick on some of the things that Adrian's been saying. Where we get this from? How do we justify economically any kind of pay rises within the public sector when so many people are struggling very badly and maybe facing redundancy or other kinds of job losses very, very soon, Patrick? And we discovered yesterday, I think it was the latest budget, the latest borrowing figures. This year alone, we've borrowed more than twice the total borrowing for last year. Who knows? It could be 3 or 4 times last year's borrowing figure by the end of this year, maybe even more, because we've got to buy our way out of this terrible situation we're in, this catastrophe, this economic depression we're facing, Patrick.
Well, could I first of all say, William, that I welcome the comments that were made by Adrian there, because yesterday there was an effort by the Tory government to spin this as a good news story. Adrian stripped that away. What he basically said was, it's not much, but it's good enough for you, and you should be grateful. Now, I would congratulate him for it, but I don't think he should be expecting a call up from the Tory party press office anytime soon. But it was good that the message came out nice and honestly there. Now, he also made the comment about inflationary pay rises and where above inflation pay rises should come from and whether this would happen in the private sector or not. The real issue here, though, is in the private sector, companies have got used to super profits. There is no sharing of those profits with the workers on the ground. What needs to happen is the workers need to get better pay. And here's the news, Adrian. That means less profits for the super rich. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. As far as public sector workers are concerned, remember, these are the people who were applauded 6 weeks ago and were told that the future is yours and everything will be sorted out and you'll be looked after and thank you for what you're doing, because you're the guys who are put in the front line and expected to die over the next period of time. Now the word is from Adrian, above inflation is too good for you. What Adrian is saying is your living standard should never improve. So the bin man, your living standard won't improve. The nurse, your living standard won't improve. The care worker, your living standard won't improve. The classroom assistant, your living standard won't improve. Remember this, William. Public sector pay has fallen in real terms by between 18 and 30% from the beginning of austerity. There needs to be a catch-up on that, and it needs to happen soon. Now, Adrian, the question...
No, honestly, I'm being very generous with time, but I can't have 20-minute speeches. Let's go to Adrian. Adrian.
Yeah, well, certainly, I think that, I take Patrick's points, but absolutely, the money is just not around at the moment for us to give above inflation pay rises, because the private sector...
Can't you borrow the money?
Well, there's an awful lot of borrowing has been going on. The problem is, no matter how low the interest rates are, when you borrow something, you have to pay it back. And if we see loads of job losses in the private sector, as is predicted by many, many people, then who is going to pay the taxes to pay back these borrowings? And
are we going to be
left just with the public sector? I mean,
interest on borrowed money is pretty cheap these days, isn't it?
Interest is, yes, absolutely. We can all get a big mortgage and pay low interest, but at the end of the day, the lender still wants the mortgage back, and that's our problem. How will we ever repay this debt that we're saddled with? And interest rates will not be guaranteed to be so low forever. But if the private sector suffers, and I mean, obviously Patrick says workers should get more of the share of the profits. Lots of companies do give workers a share of the profit. I know many of my clients who are employees get once or twice a year a bonus, which is a profit share, depending on how their division has done. So it does happen.
Adrian, can I ask a political question, though? I mean, is it possible for Robin Swann, the Health Minister, not to champion pay rises for medical staff here, doctors, dentists and the like, given that they've just been given the pay rise in England, Scotland and Wales?
It's a difficult one, but this is what happens when you have devolution. The Northern Ireland ministers get to make their own decisions. And obviously Robin Swann has an awful lot of time for the fantastic work that has been done by the NHS over a very stressful, worrying time.
So why shouldn't they get a pay rise?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't get a pay rise, but whether we can afford to give them the pay rise that England is getting is another matter. Robin will have to talk very carefully to his other executive colleagues to see if it can be afforded. But there's no reason that Northern Ireland has to go along with the English rules, because at the end of the day, in my view, the above inflation pay rises given in England are also not a good idea given the financial constraints we are going to have to see over the next decade.
Let's go to the phone lines again. Josephine Deehan is on the line. She's a GP in Omagh and an independent councillor in the Fermanagh and Omagh District Council. How are you doing, Josephine?
Good afternoon, William.
Give us your thoughts on this.
This is a very interesting debate, but whether we like it or not, remuneration does affect our quality of life. And therefore it will affect recruitment to the professions. Dr. Tom Black was on the radio this morning. In real terms, there has been a 30% reduction in the income of doctors in Northern Ireland compared with their counterparts in Great Britain. That is totally unacceptable, and it is directly affecting recruitment, because why would a young doctor or a young nurse or any allied health professional choose to continue to be employed in Northern Ireland when they can go across the water, do the same job for more remuneration? It simply does not make sense. I think that when you work in the National Health Service, people are drawn to this type of work. It is a vocation, and people give up many years of their lives to study, training, exams, stress, make many sacrifices. So I do think it's fair to expect that when they do qualify, and in the cases of doctors as GPs or hospital consultants after many years, that they would expect to be fairly remunerated to an extent that would give them parity with their counterparts across the water.
Isn't it also the case that we have lower costs of living here vis-a-vis much of GB, and doctors are already paid a fairly decent salary, aren't they?
Well, I do accept that doctors earn a good salary compared with many other professions, but I do believe that they are worth that. You must remember that our NHS cannot survive without doctors and nurses. I think that quality of life issues are really important. Yes, the cost of living is lower in Northern Ireland, but, you know, we have higher expenses in other ways. For example, if we want to go on holiday abroad, or the cost of that travel is much more compared with Great Britain. The fact is that we have to look at recruitment. The NHS waiting lists are unacceptably long because there are many, many vacancies in medical posts throughout Northern Ireland. Yep. Unless you can attract dedicated professionals into Northern Ireland, recruit and retain them, then we are going to be facing these very, very long waiting lists. It's totally unacceptable. Ultimately, you would be doing a disservice to the general public. The Doctor and Dentist Review body on remuneration has made a recommendation. It is now up to executive ministers to implement those recommendations. Ministers do have discretion,
obviously,
and the affordability issue has been raised by Adrian. But really, there are other factors to be taken into consideration.
Josephine, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Jim's in Dundonald. Let's get Jim's thoughts on this. Jim?
Good afternoon, William. First of all, could I correct your last person there on saying the cost of living in England is we're cheaper than they are. If you look at some things in England, the daily markets that they have, their fruit and veg is far, far cheaper than us, but that's getting off the subject.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
The idea that we need nurses and we need doctors. So why charge them to learn? Forget about the fee when they've done their training, come out owing thousands of pounds. Right. Why don't we say at the start, sign this legal agreement that whenever you become a professional nurse or doctor, we will wipe off your owed money for a number of years, say 10 years, provided you stay in the country of graduation. That's one way of taking a lot of money that they don't have.
Yep.
So you'd have a change of doctors every 10 years coming out that don't owe a penny to the system. And another thing...
Jim, thank you very much. I just want to come back. We've only got a minute and a half. I want to come back to Patrick and Adrian. That's a very interesting idea. We've talked about that in the past, about other ways in which you can engage in remuneration. If you could address this question directly with Robin Swan, Patrick, what's the strongest argument you can make for some kind of pay parity here with GB? And I know you want more, but we're at that level in this conversation.
Well, in this conversation, I think what I would say to Robin Swan is our health service workers should be at least of the same value as an MP who's getting 3.1% pay increase this year. If we're getting less than that, it doesn't amount to much.
And in 20 seconds, Adrian, your message to him.
My message to him is he has to work out where is he going to take the money off and the amount of pain that will be caused by removing money elsewhere in the budget. Adrian
Huston, Patrick Mulholland, thanks to both of you. That's it from us. Thanks for all your text, tweets and calls. The debate continues on Twitter at BBC TalkBack.